My name is Kyle. I work at Jamf. I'm here to basically be the QA moderator at the end and to welcome our last guest of the morning, Joel Rennick from True Source Labs, who's going to talk about what I hope you're here for is Swift, the API, and you guys. So here you go. Y'all. There's a lot of people. Y'all. All right. There's a lot of people here. So there you go. Joel, everybody.
Good morning. I'm between you and lunch. Like literally, because I think lunch, like you said, is right out there. So that's me. A little more, all right, I look about the same. All right. So a couple of things that we're going to cover, and this is cold brew, a few of you have asked. It's from the truck across the street. Or at least that's what we put the label on so we could get it in the building. We'll talk about the JSS API. We've been doing some work with it in Swift, so we'll give you some examples of how to use it in Swift, and then also talk about some practical applications of some places that we've been using it to hopefully really extend quite a bit what you may be doing with a Jamf Pro server, right? All right, I got that. Some cool ideas to see what to do next. And hopefully we get it all within about 40 minutes, take some questions at the end. The cold brew is here to help me condense time so we can get as much in as possible. And I do have some demos, and I know it's very risky. They said don't do demos, but we're going to do demos. Woo! And if they don't work, I have screenshots that I think I've stashed somewhere so I can magical hand wave. All right, so first of all, get to know the JSS API. If you haven't used it already, it's web-based, returns JSON or XML. We found the XML to be more reliable. That may have changed, but we go with the XML now. JSON's a little easier to parse, but XML isn't that much harder. Fairly standard. If you've worked with web interfaces before, passed JSON, XML before, this will be very familiar to you. A lot of the tools that you may have already used, you should be able to easily repurpose for it. So all good there. Obviously, you need a password for the API. And so I would be remiss to not mention this as before going forward. If you're going to be putting this into any of your code, this is one of the reasons why I like Swift for this, is at least gets compiled. All right? So if you want to have an API password in there, or the new universal API has some tokens, you can put that into your code, you can compile the code. It's still not, I wouldn't call it secure, but it's at least more obfuscated. And then we do some other things within the code. You can parse that password into 2 or 3 different bits. You can build it programmatically with a function. You can run a ROT13 on it. Just be very, very careful that if you run strings on the binary, if you just put the password in there, even though it is compiled, the password will still show up. All right? So a big word of caution here. We have been doing more work with keychains, and we are looking at actually shipping the password in a keychain that only the app knows the password to. And that way we can change out the passwords inside the keychain a little bit easier, and then have the app itself open up the keychain, get the password out of it, and then use that. So there are some things like that. But again, I would be remiss if I didn't put this up front, so make sure that you do that. And I'll show you in a little bit, we've done some command line work where we've got a Swift tool out of just a command line tool that you can pass the password and hostname to it itself. So you can call it that way as well. All right, so playing with the API, the first thing that you want to do, if you haven't done already, whatever your URL for your Jamf instance is, /API, you can manually kind of mess around with it. It's kind of a web interface, shows you all the end nodes. You can click buttons and whoo! Maybe not do it on a production system at first. Just a thought. Most of it's pretty safe because a lot of it is just getting stuff out of the API as opposed to putting stuff into it. It's a great place to test. Here's a kind of a screenshot of what it looks like. And again, you can go through here. Here's an example of looking at computer groups and getting a list of the IDs that are back from there. All right? Kind of handy, just gives you an idea. We use this a lot to just kind of brainstorm about what we want to do with it. We've got this problem, we'd like to figure out a way to do it. Let's just go look at everything that it does and kind of sort through and see some stuff. You won't have 100% control of your Jamf instance, but you have a lot of entry points into it. All right, so using this a little bit with Swift. Who's doing work in Swift? All right, well, my goal is by the end of this session, everybody will raise their hand. Grumble, grumble, all right. All right, some tips for when you're starting out. You will go insane if you don't write a wrapper for this, right? You want a set of functions. That's what we use. We have a library file that we just pass around into all the apps that we use with it, and then we can call it consistently. Building in this functionality into every app individually every time is not going to be fun, all right? So find a wrapper. You don't have to write it. I'm going to give you one here in a little bit that you can go download and you can use for a lot of this work that you may do. Just use that, get to know it, and you'll go from there. Another big piece, if you're moving from shell script or if you've not done much work with Swift, it becomes very asynchronous very quickly, especially when you're working with web services. So you're going to be making a call to the web API. You're going to be asking it for a list of computer groups, a list of machines, whatever else. You're then going to have to wait for that return to come back. Your code is going to have to handle that. If you're expecting it to execute synchronously like it would with a shell script where you may be doing curl statements or something else like that, you're going to have to do some changes. It's not impossible, but just keep that in mind. And because of that asynchronicity, working in Swift playgrounds. Who's played around with the playgrounds? On the Mac at least? Beautiful. Great place to start. You can start doing some of this work there. However, because the playgrounds are not as asynchronous friendly, you've got to do a little bit of work, make the run loop work until it ends. Or you can cheat, get really lazy, and just put a sleep statement at the end. That's not proper coding. You should never use sleep in your app. But if you want to make sure that the return from your asynchronous call comes back before the application quits, you can have it sleep at the end, and then you can look what's there. All right, fair enough? Keep that in mind. Here is an API wrapper that you can go grab. It is Swift 2. Andrew Bitson wrote it. Great guy, put a lot of good work into it. We're going to update it for 3 and going to put it in there. But here's a place that you can start. It does about 6 or 7 different API commands, and we found them to be the 6 or 7 different ones that you really care about. Things like adding a computer to a group, creating a computer in the Jamf instance, doing some things like that. There's a lot of the API that as an administrator you probably don't care about. You probably don't often need to set buildings and other things through the API, so don't worry about that. Focus on the things that you need. And here's a little example of calling it. It's getting a computer record. That's a completion handler that we'll talk about in a little bit. Sets up an NS mutable URL request. You can tell this is Swift 2 because everything still starts with next step. Get some returns back from it, and then it'll return the data. All right? Completion handlers we need to talk about because this is where a lot of the asynchronous stuff goes. When you submit the function or when you send the parameters, you're actually sending a completion handler, which is a chunk of code. And a completion handler will then run when the return has come back from the asynchronous call. All right? Again, as somebody that really did a lot with shell script, this kind of blew my mind a little while. And so I offered up here as an ability to get you to have less frustration if you're starting off in this. So it's cool. It's code that will execute when the answer comes back from the web services. And of course, with great power comes great responsibility. And so you need to work with glue and the code a little bit together. Here's an example of a completion handler. And when you're getting the response back from the API, you're going to get some of the HTML codes. So now we know if it's an error or not, and then we can work with that. If we don't get any data back, we throw an error. If we do get an error code back from one of the HTML responses, we can then handle that within this completion handler. And so it's a nice block of code, handles all that, then passes up the result back to the rest of the code. All right? If you're working with the asynchronous, you want to start looking at semaphores. This is Swift 3 code, again, because it doesn't have next step in front of everything. So you can actually dispatch a semaphore. It's effectively a lock that you're putting on the process, and you don't want to go any further. When you're working with the API, you may do a lot of things like find out whatever computer ID of the machine that I'm on currently, and then add that to a group. you need to have this syntactic sugar to make sure that you can do one process after the other. Otherwise, you're going to fire off your second request without actually knowing the computer ID of the machine. Things are going to fail. You're going to be upset. You're going to throw the machine away. We don't want that. That's not good. So here's a couple of examples, just real quick, of you can dispatch a semaphore. That's just effectively a flag that lets the process know that it needs to wait until some response comes back from it. Right? Not hard at all, but you just have to understand that it's there. All the results will be in XML. You're going to hate XML. You're going to hate XML. You're going to want to use regular expressions. You're going to want to use grep. You're going to want to do something to pipe it out and convert it into something you understand. I was there. Swift has XML parsing. It'll make your head hurt. If you look online, you'll find about 3,000 different libraries of other places that will parse XML for you. All right? So please look into one of those. Or, you know, if you're doing code that nobody is looking, which is what this started off with before I'm going to post it, you can get away with doing silly things like regular expressions and just looking for particular strings. I've had to go back and cleanse that out so that I didn't present bad examples. Having said that, XML parsing is something that you're going to spend some time on, but it's where you need to be because all the results that you get back from the API will be in a big XML chunk. Here's an example of an XML parser. It has itself as a delegate. It passes itself to itself. You got to pick it up when it goes. But it's how you do it. So, yeah, no response. All right, some examples. This is where we get to the fun part. We are working without a net. I think they'll all work. They worked this morning. They did not work last night. So the first thing we wanted to do is kind of do a simple CLI utility to do group adds. This is a pretty common activity that you may want to do programmatically from either an admin system or maybe you've got an Excel spreadsheet that you're parsing out, a number spreadsheet that you're parsing out, or a CSV file or something else like that that you want to go out, put those computers into groups. There's probably there is a wide variety of Python, Ruby, other apps that are out there. I haven't found too many specifically for Swift, so that's one of the reasons why we kind of went down this path. So I've written up a little command line utility, group adds. It's a fun place to start. In and of itself, I would be hard-pressed to say it's got much of an advantage over Python or any other language that you may already use. All right? So I'm not particularly claiming that Swift is going to be better. Don't want to get into language wars. Swift is what I know, and that's what we'll be using here, because that's the title of the session, to be perfectly honest. And just real quick, an easy way, Swift can get command line arguments. So if you're used to creating apps that focus on command line args that you spread, it just comes into a command line.arguments variable. Pull it all out from there, and then you can parse it. All right, so a demo. Dun, 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 dun. Of course, we've expired. So I've got a Jamf Cloud instance that the good folks at Jamf are very happy to set up for me. And you can see a couple of things in here. It is a very empty instance. There's my MacBook here, but we're going to create another machine in it. We've got some groups that we've set up, some dep groups. We'll talk about those in a little bit. So let's do something with this. Xcode. All right, so here is an app that we have. We'll post this online. So you get a couple of ideas. We set up some variables, we read in some command line arguments, and then we actually call this API that we have. Set up a completion handler so we can do something with the values that return. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to create a machine, and we'll talk about this in a little bit. We're going to fake a serial number and a MAC address, and then we're going to add it to a group that we've set up with some of the command line arguments that we're sending. So if this all works, I'm going to hit run. Of course, hello world, beautiful. All right, so it came through. We've got 201 codes, which is great. And if we go back to here and I look at search inventory and I look at computers, we've got another computer. All right, whew. At least one demo works. If none of the demos worked, you'd think I wasn't know what I'm doing. So cool. Now, this was something that was very interesting to us. I've always been a little bit frustrated that with a Jamf server, you can't have a placeholder and create a workflow around it before the machine is enrolled. With the API, you can. So by submitting a MAC address and a serial number, I've now got a little bit of a placeholder in there. If I click on it, the server gets a little bit unhappy with me. It's unmanaged, it's not been inventoried, there's nothing in it, but I can put this into a group, all right? And if I go down here now to my static computer groups, you can see that this DEP designer group that I created, there is a machine in it, and it's the placeholder. So now I can have policies that are triggered off these groups, and now I can create workflows for machines that have never even been put into the JSS. That's kind of interesting, right? But wait, we've got more. All right, so that was the demo. I'm glad it worked. Thank you, thunderous round of applause. All right, so what we wanted to do with this, who's got device enrollment program? Everybody raise their hands. Who can't use it in all situations? Most people raise their hands. All right, it's a great, amazing technology. We're leveraging it a lot with our customers that we work with. Problem is, not all countries have it. It's not Apple's fault. That's legal. That's other stuff that they got to deal with. We get that. BYO doesn't really work. Maybe you had a purchasing person that had no idea what they were doing, and you have no idea where the machines came from. That happens more often than I'd like to admit. So you've got a problem there where they don't even show up in the system. So what we wanted to do was to create a workflow based around the JSS API and the ability to kind of replicate DEP and that full workflow that you may have without actually being in an environment that has DEP enabled. With that as the premise, we'll show you some of the things that we've done. So we use the API to create a placeholder account. This allows us to have that very skeleton system in there that we can then add to groups. Once that's added to a group, we can actually merge that group with a smart group that's based on the pre-stage enrollment path that you already have set up. And now that machine that's not in DEP can actually flow through that DEP process. Does that make sense? Is that exciting? All right, a little more? All right, do you all have to have cold brew? I didn't bring enough for everyone. It was very rude of me. All right, so a couple of ways of how we can do this. Here's the placeholder creation that we're doing. I also have another library that I use that will get MAC addresses and other things. So if I'll show you this in the code in a little bit. I also have, and we'll post the GitLab page. People make fun of me for using GitLab. Who else uses GitLab? I've taken a load of crap for using GitLab. I mean, there's like a GitHub mafia that seems upset about me. I used it because the Fox logo was pretty cool. And beyond that, I didn't really get much further. So anyway, so I've got a page on GitLab, gitlab.com/MacTroll. On there is a NSTask wrapper. NSTask allows you to do shell commands effectively. It's now called process, Swift 3, whatever. I like NSTask a little better. It seems cooler, old school, all the rest. So I've got a library that has a couple of common commands like getting serial numbers, getting MAC addresses, and other stuff. So I add that to a lot of the apps that I write. So now we've got a placeholder. To create a placeholder, you need a serial number, and you need a MAC address, and you need a computer name, 3 things. All right? And then you can use the API to create that machine within the JSS and then add it to groups and go from there. So this is what we're doing right here, and you're kind of seeing a little bit more of the Swift work for the rest of that. So some things to keep in mind when we do this. Placeholders don't show up in smart groups because they're listed as unmanaged systems. So you'll see it in your static groups, but you won't see it in your smart groups. Fair enough? Don't be surprised. I'm telling you that now. It took me a little while to go, wait a minute. All right? You need a serial in Mac. I have no idea if this works with iOS. Absolutely none. But it'd be really cool if it would. Yeah?
It works with iOS, but you need the UDID.
Ah.
Manufacturing will get that to you.
Wonderful. So, comment from the audience. It does work with iOS, but you need to add the UDID as well. The Universal Device Identifier, right? Something like that. We'll go with it. So, cool. So, for those of you watching at home, the millions of viewers, ignore that bottom bullet. Well, I still haven't tried it with iOS, but we have a positive response here from the audience. Thank you very much. So some cool stuff that you can do with there. So the workflow that we have here, we actually have an app, we'll show it to you in a little bit, where the user can actually select, or the admin can select a particular group. But before we do that, we've got to reach out through the JSS API, or actually find local info first, right? Yellow arrow means we're doing this on a local system, and we grab the serial number and the MAC address. We're running this app locally. If you were going to parse through a list of serial numbers or UDIDs from an iOS device, you just import a CSV or a numbers file, if that makes sense. We want to run it locally because I'll show you why we're using this in a little bit. We then reach out to the JSS, create a placeholder account, just like I showed you, and then we add it to the group, and that's where the rest of the magic happens after that. And this is because we've created a pre-stage enrollment group and a dumb group that are both part of a smart group. I shouldn't be poor group. But it's not smart. So we've combined those two together, and that allows us to create a workflow. And many of you probably have different workflows. Here's the one that we've created. We do a quick 2 to 3 minutes of installations, which is primarily VPN, profiles, the other settings. We want to get the user done within 2 or 3 minutes. We then pop them up a dialog box to go log off so that File Vault can actually start. And then once they come back in, we have a bunch of group-specific policies that are hinged on a login and set to once. All right. The key thing that we did here, and I'll mention this because it kind of drove us fits for a little bit. We flush policy in between, especially if you're using a test system and you're constantly re-enrolling that. If you don't flush policy there, you may have a lot of policies that are just set to do once, and then you're like, why isn't this working again? I flushed it. All right. So let me show you. Whoops, I didn't want to go that far. Head into the JSS a little bit so you can kind of see this. So we've got a bunch of pre-stage enrollment groups. There's no space between the dashes. That's just a naming convention that we've used. These are all coming from the same DEP account. We just have 3 different entry points into the same JSS, and you can have your settings and everything. It's common with the accounts that we work with that you may have an office user, a designer, developer. There's some base involved in it, and then other little bits on top, right? So we now present these 3 up here. I have some static groups that are called the same thing. And then we have smart groups with the dash that combine both the pre-stage enrollment group and then that static group for the both of them. All right? And so that's how we can merge the accounts together. Whether you come in through an actual DEP deployment where you've been assigned to that workflow through the device enrollment portal, program portal, DEP-P, or you've been created through a placeholder and then been instantiated inside a group. Does that make sense? Pretty simple. And then as far as the policies go up here, we've got an enrollment base that as soon as anything gets enrolled that gets set up, we then have a flush policies and a log out. And again, if you alphabetize them, policies are run in an alphabetical order. You may have already known that. If you don't, I'll save this little patch of hair on the back of your head by announcing that here. All right? So you can make policies run in order by having them alphabetical. We've got this policy at the end of the initial enrollment that logs you out and flushes all the policy. And then we have a bunch of policies that are set up for if you're logging in or whatever else. All right? Again, kind of makes sense. It's a nice workflow. We've been very happy with it. And it allows us to create things like this, which is an app that we've set up. You can set in your full name, your AD username, whatever else you want to do, an email address. We'll stash all that information locally, so extension attributes or ARD or whatever else you want to do can pull from it. And then, using the API, we go out and we find all the groups that either you may be a member of or may be available to you or have workflows. Obviously, you sort this based upon your own preferences. You can pick whichever one you want, hit set up account, and we'll run the quick add package for you because the quick add package is part of this app. And then you're in that workflow, you're off to the races. And now I've allowed kind of a BYO or an admin to do this without having to worry about, geez, I got to set this up and then apply these policies and do all this. All right? Is this cool? All right, well, good. We're getting all right. So yeah, exciting. Thanks for coming. No, I got more. All right. So why I like doing this in Swift, and this is where maybe we get into a bit of a language wars, it is very easy to work with the APIs from Swift. All right, that is a definite advantage made by Apple. It is a moving target, and I know Python's got amazing functionality into the system. Still not Python 3 on the machine, so maybe you don't like that. But with Swift, you got it. Easy integration with the user interface, which is the other thing I really, really like. All right, there's ways of getting other languages to work with a UI on side OS 10, Mac OS, excuse me. Man, I'm dropping those all over the place. I get older every year. But you can easily use the interface with Swift. It's all in Xcode. You don't have to go to another tool or anything else. So that's why I find it very easy for me. And then it's very easy to create a signed binary. Not that you can't do any of these things with other languages, but Swift streamlines this quite a bit. And it's why I've been using Swift for this. All right, but let's make it better. What if it was even cooler than this? So this is a little bit of a preview to things that we've been working on. Not finished with this yet, but we're most of the way there. We're working on a guided BYO enrollment process. We have a couple of accounts that are looking at BYO. And we wanted to do testing the system for compliance before they were able to enroll in BYO, and then give them a DEP-like experience after that with a workflow that mirrors maybe what one of their coworkers on a corporate-owned system or institutionally owned system would have. And so that's why we're going to take what we already have with that little enroller app, and this is another place where I really like Swift, is you could have a set of criteria that need to get met before they can even enroll in the first place. So now you can make sure password complexity, file vault status, whatever you want to do can be put into there, the acceptance of an end user licensing agreement, and then it'll do the JSS API calls, create a placeholder for the machine, put that machine in the proper group based upon whatever criteria you want to do, and then enroll the machine within Jamf. The workflow kicks off. The user has an experience that's very similar to a device enrollment program system, but just a little bit further into the installation process. All right? So we'll probably get this finished up in the next couple of weeks. I've been busy doing some other things, which has been unfortunate. But once we get this posted, this will be out. We'd like to share it with all of you, as we think it'd be a pretty cool stuff. Thank you. Thank you. But, and I'm glad you asked, what about Nomad? So some of you may know this. It's a little utility we've been working on so you can get rid of AD. Nomad.menu. Somebody on the Slack channel is from Andorra. We tried to get nom.ad, but you have to be an Andorran national. Anybody from Andorra? Anybody know where Andorra is? All right, it's good. It's good. Between France and Spain, and it's jointly ruled by the President of France and the Pope. The King of Spain and the Pope. The King of Spain and the President of France. Thank you very much. I should have actually remembered the Wikipedia page. But I think that's pretty cool. All right, so we were doing the session and we said, what could we do that would be really cool and excite people about using the JSS API with other apps that they may already have. So we've got this app, it's cool. It kind of replicates some of the AD functionality, but when I was in Sweden 2 weeks ago, shout out to Tico and the rest of the group from the Mac Sysadmins Conference. Woo, there they are, yep. A Finn, and if you've ever been in a bar with a Finn, it can be quite a long night. But he came up to me, and I apologize, I can't remember his name, and he said, what if you could create, the only thing we have left to do with an admin account in AD is allow a network user to authenticate locally. All right? If you get rid of directory services entirely, you just have local users, life becomes pretty simple for a lot of things, with the exception of what if your help desk walks up to that machine, how do you manage that? And we said, aha, we could fix that. So, this is pretty cool. I don't know that we'll use this in production, but it was a pretty cool thought. All right, so let's go over here. And what we have is, if I go back to Xcode and I show you some of Nomad, there it is, and it's a bazillion lines now. And Philip and I think Owen are probably in the audience, so shout out to them because they've been doing some great work on all this stuff. And so we've got all these cool things that are going on here. You can actually add a JSS API to almost any app. So this is that library that I was talking about before, and you can just drop this in, and now you have those functions available in any other app that you may have written, all right? And so what we did with this, well, wouldn't it be cool if you could check out a password? And so we've got Nomad running up here, and I've been logged in, and if I hold down Control Option, I get a checkout password function. So what this is going to do is there's a policy in the Jamf server that I've just added my machine to a group that's scoped to that policy that's going to run a script that randomizes a password and then sets a local user to that password. So now I have a network account in AD that I've authenticated with. Nomad knows that because it's picked up the Kerberos tickets. It knows what groups I'm in. So based upon that group membership, I can now execute this API call to put this local machine in that group in the Jamf server that then runs that policy. And I was hoping it would have happened by now, but there's that 5-minute delay that's kind of random. So what we're going to do here, we're going to cheat. This is Julia Childs taking the chicken out of the oven. And so we're going to force the policy to run. There it goes. Uh-oh. Then we're going to do this, 11728. And then we're going to do this again. And then it's going to run. Hey! So through the API, and just to prove, SU boss and 0321B, don't copy this down, 17B, I've turned off SSH on this machine. Now I've logged in as an admin user with that password. Kind of fun? I've got a record in the JSS about this happening. I know who kind of checked it out because I can pass some of those parameters if I wanted to. And I can just show you this is what didn't work last night but did work this morning. And I'm glad it's working this afternoon as well. We've got some other ways that we're looking into the code for doing this. But I just kind of, again, it was an idea of what you could do. If I go to the static computer groups, you can see there's an admin password checkout group. That's now this MacBook. And that was all done through the API. So when Nomad ran that, it looked at the local serial number in ID. It then created that or added that machine to that group inside the Jamf server. And then that kicked off a policy that's down here, which is reset admin user, which then had a really nasty shell script that I'll show you, but I'm a little embarrassed about. Password randomization that just grabs I really cheated and used UUID gen. Don't do this at home. But it generated 8 random characters. I chopped the front 8 off, and then I just do a discal command. So some cool things that you can do, and then the Jamf display message, so that way you could get it. If you really wanted to use this full time, you would then have another policy that every 30 minutes re-randomize that password to something else. All right, and that way you could have a password that an admin or an IT worker could check out of the system, could check out of the JSS using the APIs, get local admin access, and then go from there. Kind of fun? Yeah. All right. Now if we get out of this, and back to the slides. Get rid of this. There you go. Go away. Thank you. Oh, that was the demo. I hit the wrong slide. So thank you very much. And we have a couple of minutes for questions, so I'm happy to take. I think we probably have some that came in over Twitter.
Yes,
and
tons.
Then at the end, I've got some cards. There's a URL if you want to find the stuff that we used, or you can just watch the video again and get the URLs from there as well.
So the first and probably most important question was, the beverage in the growler looked good. Looks like stout from the back.
Yeah, it does, but it's not. And I'm not being paid by Misfit, but they're the coffee truck on the corner. And they were really good. I think they thought I was kidding when I asked for a growler because they had one sitting out front. And then he paused for a moment. He said, I'll be right back. And you can fill them up. It's $15 for a growler or a cold brew.
Wow, you're really going for that one.
Well, I got to pay for the trip somehow.
I guess first real question. Why not use app config for passwords?
Why not use app config for passwords?
Yeah. That's chatted the JNUC one. Not sure if it related to this one, if you guys are doing something else. Does that make sense to you or ring a bell?
No.
Okay, we'll skip it.
Okay.
Let's
Awkward.
see. Definitely.
We can chat afterwards.
Let's see. MAC address.
Yep.
Does that have to be real, accurate for placeholder system? How does that work in your
That's a good
experience?
question. So do you have to put in the real MAC address? I believe it uses either the MAC address or the serial number that when the machine gets enrolled afterwards to make sure it meshes up those accounts. Because how we do it when we create that placeholder, and I guess I've never tried it without using the right information, when you enroll the system later on, it overwrites that placeholder account. So when you create that placeholder, you'll see, and we usually tag it with a name so it's very easily to search, placeholder dash serial number of the machine, right? When you enroll it later on, that placeholder goes away. Your normal Jamf policies that set up the machine accounts and everything else like that will take over. The name will change, and that machine account's name will change in the JSS. So if you tried it with a bad MAC address, my guess is it probably wouldn't work because I think it uses the MAC address and the serial number to ensure that the later account overwrites that placeholder.
Is this where the test and don't test in production comes into play?
Very much so. Very much so.
All right. Next question. Do placeholders count against Jamf Pro license count? You want me to take this one? You got this one?
I think I can offer, since they're unmanaged, I don't believe they do.
Depends on how you bring them in, but yeah.
Fair enough.
Yep. So if you flag something as managed, it does count against your license count. I'll have to double check. I'm an engineer, so I'm not on the sales side of the house. But if it's unmanaged, it used to count against the Recon seats, Recon Suite, which isn't really a product for us anymore.
Okay.
But check with your Jamf buddy first before you go deploying a whole bunch of stuff.
In our case with the placeholders literally last about 4 minutes. We only need them in there from when we initially hit that enrollment to when the actual machine is enrolled. And we do it on the fly. You could certainly do this beforehand. There's other reasons for that. If you know you've got a large shipment of machines coming. When we do it in the apps, we do it, it's still in the policy. Uh-oh, I was supposed to remove that. You're seeing the other turkey in the oven right now. That's slightly embarrassing. All right. There we go, we get. All right, come on. All right, and back to the slides. And I've got another 5 minutes before that policy runs again. So that'll let me know when the QA is up. So we only use that placeholder for about like 2 or 3 minutes. It's long enough to get the machine up there, get it into a workflow, and then enroll the machine and go from there. So in that case, it probably shouldn't be an issue whether it's decrementing your license count or not, because you're going to be using that license within a few minutes regardless.
More of a comment, less of a question, but it says mind equals blown. Good job.
Beautiful. Thank you very much.
All right.
My job here is done.